Recording. And you've all heard that great announcement. My name is Sharon Terry. I'm the president and CEO of Genetic Alliance. I think all of you are very familiar with us. It's how you got to be in this webinar. And what we like to do in these is really give all the time to our speakers. And so I'm going to turn this over fairly quickly to Ian Terry and Caitlin Esposito. Ian is the Senior User Experience Research. He's going to tell you at Luna. And Caitlin is at Bobby Jones. And together they're going to tell us about community-driven innovation. And so without further ado, Ian, turning it over to you.
Thank you very much. I am still getting over a cold, so pardon me if I start coughing or sneezing at any point here. Caitlin and I are going to be kind of doing a two-part here. I'm going to be introducing the general idea of community-driven innovation, and Caitlin is going to be talking about the practical applications that they have been using it for at Bobby Jones CSF. So as Sharon already said, I am the Senior User Experience Researcher at Luna. We are a data collection and technology company for health data and any other sensitive information. Today, we're going to be talking about community-driven innovation, which is our name for a method that we've method and a process that we've constructed to be able to kind of decentralize priority generation and community needs, and really push it towards outcome for individuals and their lived experiences, rather than kind of what comes up from expert analysis or anything else like that. The purpose of this is really to accelerate the right research that matters the most to the right individuals. That's our ethos behind community-driven innovation. So community-driven innovation is really, like I said, about decentralizing the setting of the priorities and giving communities a seat at the table built out of like real data. We have a fantastic quote from one of the people that worked with us early on, that this is the way that we make sure that people know we exist. It is all about getting this sort of information in a kind of validated way, so that nobody can argue with the way it was collected, or nobody can say this information isn't real, or all that or other sorts of stuff that all of us have heard many times while going through these processes. The framework for CDI is really about getting to as many people as possible without having the inherent biases that come up from many of the other processes. Focus groups kind of give us the bias of groupthink, which we can talk about later if we need to. Delphi being completed by experts and only including a few patient voices, that sort of thing. On top of that, focus groups, Delphi processes can take up to or over a year and be incredibly expensive. So we built CDI to take care of both of the groupthink issues, the expert issues, to listen to everybody, and to make it much, much faster for us to get to the places that we are trying to go. So CDI is built to be a framework that is bottom-up iterative process. So we identify what lives look like. We talk to patients, we interact with them in different ways, whether that's survey-based or anything else. And we really sit down with an unbiased view and listen to what they're saying. Doesn't matter what it is. In my own condition, PXE, we hear things sometimes about people taking water pills as a treatment or having bunions from their PXE, and those things are not necessarily actually from PXE, but we know that that's in the space that people are communicating with and working with. And that's an important aspect of understanding people's mental models. Then we work together with those participants to design the priority hierarchies. This is done through card sorts and other survey mechanisms that really gets us to streamlining our understanding of that mental model in that space very, very quickly. We then measure how successfully that design works. Whether that's through dendrograms or ODI, outcome-driven statement tests, tree jacks, things like that. We really just need to understand how well did these two processes produce us something that can be given back to the patient population and the expert population and actually work for what we're trying to get it to do. And then, of course, this is an iterative process. So we continue our listening and we continue our growth and we improve. And this way, we've got this iterative thing between our measurements of how well something is and our improvement steps that are redoing some of these identify and design pieces. One of the biggest things here is then how, of course, do we actually do this? So the very first step of CDI that is most important is making sure that we've framed out that area properly. So we do one-on-one interviews and questionnaires, as I mentioned before. We do data capture, online listening, scraping of different areas such as, Reddit or expert publications or other places like that. And then we use set theory and node theory to find patterns and overlaps to shrink the gigantic data set that comes out of that down into something that's manageable for people. And from there, we can run into everything that we're about to, that we're about to hear from Caitlin. So I will pass it over now.
Okay, let me just share my screen. Let's play this fun game. I hope you can see only what you should see. Yep, cool. This is the wrong slide though.
Yes, looks good.
Okay, hang on one second. Are you seeing the presenter view?
Yes, you have to go back to the other view we had before.
Okay. Well, hold on one second.
No worries, Caitlin. Plenty of time. While Caitlin's doing that, if you've joined and haven't put your organization name after your name, if you could do that, that would be terrific. Because we don't have time to introduce everybody, but it gives people a sense of who's here.
Sorry, everyone.
No worries. I always say we're trying to solve all the world's problems in disease, and it's even hard to use Zoom. So of course it's going to be hard.
I should have done this before though.
You had it when you started. It was
I know. I really wanted the notes though, because I wrote all of my little notes.
Oh, I am sure you're going to be fine without your notes. I have faith in you.
We will see. I guess I'll start by just quickly introducing myself though, because that doesn't require a slide. My name is Caitlin Esposito. I work with the Bobby Jones, Chiari, and Sringamayelia Foundation. I'm kind of in charge of the research and the programs that the organization does. And one of the things that we have been trying to get really involved in is the basically improvement of research methods. At least in our case, there's really very little done in terms of like good data that are available. So one thing that we want to do is, of course, there's all the things that Ian talked about with Delphi processes and stuff like that, but it's just not been very fruitful for our organization's purposes. To that end, we are doing a lot of work with Luna and Ian, our friends here, to really improve the methodologies by which we kind of do this sort of stuff. So with that, I can finally share my screen. Here you go. Nope. There we go. And go to slideshow. You can start. Cool.
Got it.
All right. Just making sure.
Did
Can you still see?
Did you try the presenter view?
I did before, but it didn't work. Can you still see the slides?
Yes.
Yeah, we can see them. We also
But the
see your
notes.
notes. Yeah.
Oh my God.
It's fine, Caitlin.
Just gonna wing it then. Here we go. Okay,
All right,
so
good.
I wanted to start by just kind of talking about the community based participatory research. So this is a framework in public health that we frequently use. And one reason I wanted to highlight this is because the CDI methodology is really helping to advance this bit down here, the most inclusive level, community-driven research. Specifically, we are going to be focused on generating community focus areas in research. And that's kind of the case study I'm going to share with you today. But community-based participatory research is a well-established framework. So the reason I'm sharing this is essentially to show to you that while this is a new methodology, it's really based in longstanding public health work. Oh man, I really do want my notes. I'm gonna just stop sharing for 2 seconds and I'm gonna email myself something. Bear with me. I just really hate this.
You're just too conscientious. Caitlin is, I think, just finished her MPH, and so still has some really good habits the rest of us have gotten out of, in the sense of of not following exactly our script.
I have a really specific script and I do not want to deviate from it. I'm sorry, this is taking up so much time, everyone.
No problem. While you're doing that, I'll say what we really want you all to be able to see is that this new methodology that essentially has been invented by Ian, and I won't deter from his incredible ability here to put together a whole bunch of different disciplines with sociology, ethnology, anthropology, and so forth, and then merging that with more current user experience kinds of design technologies. And so what you're seeing is kind of a real cutting edge, and you saw a trademark after it. So he's trying to get the word out far and wide. We've just finished a paper that we're submitting for publication on this, in fact.
Okay, sorry everyone, I'm back. All right, so I did want to talk about the CBPR, but I really want to get to what we actually did. So our goal is to use CDI methodology to develop a more efficient and effective patient-focused drug development meeting. To briefly orient anyone who might be unfamiliar, PFDD meetings are required by the FDA as a critical step in pharmaceutical development, rather than as merely a suggestion as it had been previously. And that shift was really brought on by the 21st Century CARES Act. So since then, all these PFDD meetings are really required as part of drug development. All the previous meetings have been available publicly. So in preparing for this work, I did a lot of reading through the summaries and watching the proceedings. To their credit, PFDD meetings are absolutely great. They really include presentations from experts, real patient stories, and the issues related to diagnosis, treatment, and management are all iteratively discussed and then recorded. A summary is then written following every meeting, and then that can be used by any pharmaceutical or drug development device companies in developing those new products, INDs or IDEs. So what's the problem? It sounds like I just gave it a glowing review. It's really good in factors in patients, everything like that. It definitely satisfies all the basic tenets of CBPR. But I wouldn't disagree with you, but there's definitely more things that can be improved upon, as with any kind of methodology. PFDD is no exception. So what are some of the things that we can improve upon? Most limitingly, I believe, is that these meetings are constrained by time. And you just physically cannot get to every single person that's been invited to the meetings and hearing from them all their patient stories. You have a finite number of minutes to get to all of those really specific and complex issues. Using the CDI methodology, we'll probably be able to include large amounts of patients in the same breadth and depth that would be afforded to those few patients and caregivers at those meetings. And for disease spaces like ours, This is actually very important because Chiari malformation and syringomyelia are quite often diagnosed alongside many other comorbidities. And that can color those individuals' perspectives and experiences. In fact, one of the doctors with whom we work says this as a refrain almost, but if you've seen one Chiari patient, you've really seen one Chiari patient. There are an innumerable number of things that could be specific to each individual person. So in order to kind of get a better idea about that patient-focused input, you really need a big sample size to get a handle on what's going on with them. So one way that we can do that is to be more inclusive, and the CDI does help us do that. There are also real questions related to inequities in attendance and participation for traditional PFDD meetings, and this is coming from my public health equities background. Patients and caregivers who do not attend these meetings may want to contribute, but they might not be able to because they might be too sick to leave home. They might not be able to afford to travel to the meeting or get out of work. That's a very common thing. Some people might not trust the research infrastructure. There are a lot of social and cultural reasons that someone would not be able to participate in this kind of a meeting. Additionally, meeting attendance tends to be gatekept, and I will raise my hand as I work at a patient advocacy organizations, but these meetings are invite only by institutions that are already existing, usually by known actors. So people that we know of, we will invite them because they've been active in this space before. But this is really inherently dismissive of those who might be active in this space at other organizations, or maybe who haven't been able to be active in the past, but would like to in the future or now. So the CDI kind of has the power to democratize that participation. It's not bound by geography, can be made accessible to many populations, and it can help maximize the number of people who are actually able to participate. Another thing, a lot of things can be very complex. I know ours is. The inclusion of comorbidities will actually allow us to stratify by needs in the subgroups of patients. So I'm just showing the drag and drop that we put together. This is probably going to prove important because patients with a certain constellation of symptoms and comorbidities are almost entirely different pathophysiologies than others. So just as an example, patients who have both Chiari and Ehlers-Danlos syndrome are probably more likely to undergo surgeries called spinal fusions, where they kind of solidify the spine there with neurosurgery, whereas patients with Chiari alone likely only need a posterior fossa decompression, so creating the space at the back of the skull there. These are effectively two entirely different diseases, quote unquote, for lack of a better term, and they involve entirely different treatment options and methodologies, including long-term plans. So this kind of suggests that any drugs or devices that are developed for these groups are going to target completely different symptoms or pathophysiologies. So it's important to know that at the outset. So the nuance afforded by the CDI tool in our population in that case is of absolute importance, because inclusion helps pharmaceutical and device companies know who they are and who they are not able to target with new therapies. So for all the reasons I stated earlier, just to recap, CDI helps address these gaps. By using CDI, we're able to include large amounts of patients and their caregivers with the same breadth and depth that are afforded the select few able to participate in in-person or virtual meetings. It's not bound by time. Instead, at least in our case, it spans several weeks, allowing the maximization of participation. And that nuance I spoke of is really important, and it's easier to see for participants who have variable case presentations. So it meets people where they're at, and it doesn't ask people to meet it in another sense. Before I move on, because I don't work for Luna, I do feel like I'm in a good position to kind of identify some of the potential limitations. And the obvious one is the possibility of bias in selecting respondents to do this type of work. Those negatively affected obviously are always more willing to engage with research. Additionally, you're relying on the population to have a certain amount of bandwidth, either emotional time or otherwise, to engage with this work. But I do want to point out that those two things are really not unique. It occurs in any practical application of CBPR, and certainly those on this webinar are acutely aware that these limitations are relevant to patient advocacy as well. So that's not necessarily a unique issue. I also would say that Ian can speak more to this, but there are mitigation tactics for reducing selection bias, so it can become manageable. Oops, that was quick, but do you want to jump in now, Ian, or do you want to? Okay, perfect.
Sure. Yes. So, wait, I mean, Caitlin, do you have more to say before I kind of bring us around back again?
No, you can go ahead first.
Okay. Great. Yeah. So as Caitlin was just saying there, right there are, of course, always going to be limitations with everything she stated there. From our population selection perspective, one of the things we make sure that we do, and this is part of the reason why in-person interviews and really getting in with individual families and looking for what we refer to as saturation is really paramount to us in that phase one. And that really comes down to us making sure that as we select these families and bring them in for interviews, we're looking not just for kind of apparent differences on the surface, but actually differences in their experiences, and looking for when the delta between those experiences gets smaller and smaller to the point where we can pretty much say that we've heard essentially every experience. That will never actually be true, of course, but we'll get really close to that by looking at that delta between each family as we have conversations with them and using both natural language processing and some machine learning algorithms to see how much is the difference in these conversations, and how are people going. From the bandwidth to respondents perspective, this is actually one of the really important pieces of why, at least I believe, that CDI is so much more impactful than these other mechanisms. And that really just comes down to, people tend to get overwhelmed by time. We see a lot of people kind of becoming jaded to the participant-centered research processes simply because there's no rapid connection between, if you can hear my daughter in the other room, I apologize. There's no rapid connection between their participation and the actual outputs of said research. This can become a major issue, especially in the modern day, where places like Amazon have a new distribution every 7 seconds, and research studies can take 2 to 5 years. And the delta there between kind of what our everyday experiences are on the timeframes of things, and the kind of the experiences they have in research become very disparate from each other, and that really limits our ability to continue working with the same group of people, because they just are going to fall off and we're going to have to find a new group, and they're going to fall off, we're going to have to find a new group. The speed of CDI, we've done some of these in as little as 6 weeks, really enables us to create that feedback loop with that same cohort. We can say, here, you've given us info, here, we're giving you back results. And the last one here, of course, is going to be an issue with all technological things ever. And we are constantly working to try and figure out better ways to do this, whether that's, an iPad that gets sent out to people, or it's phone interviews, or all the other solutions that we've all heard many times in other groups. But yes, thank you, Kate.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, that was good. That was going to be my recommendation too, as far as access to connected devices. So I'm merely mentioning this for the same reason that everyone knows. You're less likely able to access those people that are in rural areas. Access to Wi-Fi is limited there. And maybe just like being able to afford those connected devices. And I mention all 3 of these limitations basically because there is a way out of all of them. Ian highlighted the first 2, and then the last one, frankly, it's just about funding. So if there's a grant and a will, you can get those connected devices to those individuals and have them be heard. So just to get into the nitty gritty of what we actually did, how it works in this case anyway, the process is flexible and we can talk about that a little bit. I'm sure Ian will speak to it. But our methodology involved 2 rounds of community input. In that first round, we wanted to know a couple of things at baseline. Firstly, who is responding? It helped us identify who was either a patient themselves, a parent or a caregiver of a patient. And in rare cases, we offered the option of clinician responding on behalf of a patient or just engaging in the procedure, but we didn't really have that in our situation. So, but it was there as an option. We also wanted to know some information about the comorbidities for the reasons that I kind of elucidated before. Internally, we had developed a list of about over 20 potential comorbidities that could confound case presentation or treatment methods. So we made this list available for individuals to select from. They could select all that apply. The list itself was based on previous publication in the literature, as well as some anecdotal data that our interactions with patients kind of validated as important to include just in case. And then as far as this is concerned, our aim was to be as inclusive as possible so that we could parse out the results at a later date if need be. Come on. There we go. We also wanted to know all the symptoms that these folks experienced, as well as any of the treatments that they had tried in the past to address those symptoms. We had respondents upload a comma-separated list of everything they could think of. I wouldn't call this data terribly clean. The real goal of this was to develop sort of like a mega list of anything that anyone responding could think of. And it was done kind of in lieu of those initial interviews that Ian was talking about, because this was a bit of an expedited process. And then he did really the Lord's work and kind of sorting out all of that spaghetti on the wall into tangible variables for the second round. But before I kind of get into that, I just want to pause for a second and describe the communication in this project. I think it was really integral to at least this part up to the project's completion. We sent out a really long email describing the project in detail and in plain language. We pushed out several social media posts that cycled back to that long email that was explaining everything. And really importantly, we just wanted to make sure that people understood what the end goal of this project was. And that was to incentivize pharmaceutical and device companies to do R&D to treat these symptoms, their symptoms. Because right now, the only available treatments for Chiari, syringomyelia, and many of the related disorders is either brain surgery or long-term symptom management. Both of which have honestly a really shoddy track record of effectiveness, especially in those more complex patients. So there was really a clear and desperate need for innovation and new treatments, at least in our community. So getting that information out to the population definitely increased the number of people that were engaging with this process because it was immediately relevant to them. Then for round 2 of that community input, we closed the first surveys and started the ranking portion using the card sort or CDI. And this is kind of where the community itself organized and prioritized what would be most important areas for targeting as far as new therapies are concerned and which therapies had already been tried most commonly. Based on these long comma-separated lists that Ian had sifted through, we were able to come up with a list of symptoms experienced and treatments attempted. And we had folks select up to 5 only of the most prevalent for them in each category. We had similar messaging for round 2 and really pushed that this was the part of the project that kind of tells pharmaceutical and device companies what's going to be needed down the line. And I can't share all the results because it's being written up for publication, but there are some details that I can definitely share and I think are relevant to this group. So some of our results were very unsurprising. For example, headache was listed amongst the top symptoms in our analysis. This isn't surprising because occipital headache in particular at the back of the head is like a quote unquote textbook example of Chiari malformation symptoms anyway. But one interesting result was that chronic fatigue was listed as a top symptom among the respondents. Fatigue in general is not a textbook Chiari symptom. But when you think about it, it does make a lot of sense. People experiencing pain or illness are reasonably going to feel run down a lot faster. Chiari and syringomyelia in particular are those quote unquote invisible disorders. So they tend to go about their lives, and people will sometimes forget that they're ill and they find out real fast later. And additionally, illness and pain especially can just disrupt sleep patterns. So fatigue in the waking hours is not surprising at all. So this is kind of encouraging because it shows that our CDI is probably showing us real effects here that can be explained biologically. But something that really surprised us was that a majority of the respondents in our preliminary data did not list the literal only clinically specific treatment for Chiari and syringomyelia, which is neurosurgery. It does, again, make sense, though, if we think about it for a little bit. So Chiari and syringomyelia are at their root anatomical problems. So the only way to quote unquote treat that is to fix the anatomy, which would be done via surgery. The problem is there isn't great data on long-term outcomes for individuals, particularly those who are more complex with comorbidities. And so patient selection for surgery tends to be very specific. Not every patient is offered surgery. So a lot of people then are being treated by other means, and those means are wildly varied. So again, that does make sense that a lot of people are not reporting that they're having surgery as their immediate treatment, or at least one of their top fives. It's our hope through this work that we'll be able to identify new options, in particular for those who are not being offered surgery, who are probably making up a larger portion of the data set. So kind of to bring things back to why this is relevant for you all, I want to just quickly revisit what our original goal was. So it was our hope that we would be able to employ CDI to replace the traditional PFDD meeting as it currently stands. We've gotten through the bigger chunk of this work and have our data ready to be written up. And we plan to put what we've learned into a summary report, similar to those that are developed in the traditional PFDD framework. Here I have an example of the cover sheet for chronic pain, which I guess was in 2018. But once written, we plan to meet with FDA representatives, and if all goes well, they will accept and approve the summary and methodology in lieu of this time-intensive and frankly expensive PFDD meeting. Personally, I'm optimistic considering it's such a great application of the CBPR framework for community involvement, but it does remain to be seen. So as new INDs and IDEs are become available based on the priorities for improved treatments outlined in this product that we'll be developing from this initial process, we'll also be able to quote unquote complete the circle for drug development for each of these new products or pharmaceuticals using CDI. Using CDI before, during, and after clinical trials will be able to keep the process of drug device development community driven and focused on good and clinically meaningful, frankly, outcomes, while also providing companies the critical patient voice and input they need in order to finalize their products and saving them that expenditure, frankly. There's a potential for a win-win here that's really, really big. The first step is just proving that we can produce something that would be useful to pharmaceutical and device companies, which we're hopeful that will happen sometimes this year. And then just to touch on this, we're developing a strategy to disseminate these findings through the typical avenues like conferences, lectures like this, professional society meetings, as well as atypical avenues, which, thinking more outside the box, how can we get more people to know about this tool and how it has succeeded or where it needs improvement. I return to this only because personally, I feel that doing this work in a vacuum serves really nobody except your own resume or CV. And while I think it's fascinating to do research, doing research for research's sake is not really helpful. So it's really important to focus on who's benefiting, who may be harmed, that's always important to consider, and how we can let everyone know the work that we're doing. So bottom line, if we want our efforts to matter, I think dissemination is probably one of the more important things that we have to just as a unit get better at doing, particularly for those who are skeptical of our methodologies or efforts, because they need to be turned. And then I'll end with a quick note that, we're already working on some additional applications of CDI methodology. We're currently planning a project to basically perform a gap analysis in a specific aspect of patient care that may or may not be relevant to individuals watching this. And I can be in touch about that if you want to get a better handle, once I get a better handle on what the project is going to look like. But to avoid belaboring the point, the main message that I have is that CDI can be just up or down based on the need in your community, or even to identify what those needs probably are. And it allows for true community feedback in real time in an iterative way. So this is just one use case that I apologize that it took so long for me to just get my thoughts together, because I wrote it all down thinking I'd look at it. But there are innumerable other applications of this technology that you'll be able to engage and focus your priorities in your community of interest in the coming weeks and months, years. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Caitlin. And I think that brings us to opening up questions for anyone that has it.
If anyone wants me to go over what we did a little bit less mechanically, I can do that as well.
So Ian, I think while people are thinking, it might be good for you to take them through. So if they decided they would like to, for example, use this rather than the typical PFDD process, or even for just community research prioritization setting, what would be next steps for anybody interested?
Yeah, so next steps for anyone interested would really just be reaching out to us here at Luna and expressing that interest, and we could set up a conversation to go in depth in exactly how all of this works, not just what it does, so that you can get a deeper understanding of really where it's going, where its strengths are, and if this supports what you're looking for. As Sharon said in the beginning, this brings together a lot of methodologies from varying spaces. And we really focused on doing that to bring it into this one kind of cohesive piece, so that it could be applied to as many different circumstances as possible. So we even have kind of a la carte options about what do we want to build here on a bespoke level. So reaching out to us directly, as Sharon just posted, my email address is ian@lunadna.com, to see, what, and coming forward with what are your specific needs. We're not trying to build a one size fits all thing here. We're trying to build a many sizes fit many sizes, and we can build whatever we need together to make it work. Because really, as I said in the beginning, our goal and our ethos here is that we want outcomes for the people that it matters for. And that is not a one size fits all thing, but it is very much a thing that can be codified and placed within a space that's theoretically supported very much by social theory, decision set theory, and UX methodologies that have been used by Cisco and Microsoft to steal our autonomy from our decision-making processes for 30 years. And we are simply taking them back to make sure that we're going to be utilizing those for the actual good of people rather than the good of Cisco and Microsoft's shareholders. So
I would just briefly add that as far as making it as flexible as possible, I can't really count on one hand how many conversations I've had with Ian about how we can use the CDI. I'm pretty sure we've gone through about 100,000 different iterations of what we can do with it. And as far as what's coming up, we're going to focus a little bit more on transitioning pediatric to adult care, particularly in neurosurgical diseases. And the reason for that is actually because we've been approached by surgical specialization as far as what profit they can do more of as far as research is concerned. So what I would recommend is to keep your ear to the pavement and see what's going on in your circles, because I think there are surprising ways that you can kind of integrate different people's goals to have one really powerful and beneficial task for CDI to address.
So, Sarah, do you want to speak, or we can read your comment? We're happy to have you on mute if you want.
I can take it because that's something that we
Oh,
are.
okay, yeah. She has noise in the background. Go ahead. Yep.
There's a comment. I would love to see this methodology used with clinicians to capture consensus recommendations. And to that point, our organization, that is one of the iterations of the CDI that we plan on using. It's going to be a little bit of a CDI light, quote unquote, because it doesn't involve as much interviewing and all that. But we do have this area of significant disparate opinions as far as craniocervical instability is concerned, particularly as far as what the clinical manifestations are and even how you can objectively measure it on imaging. So one of the things that we were planning on doing was using CDI either just within the investigator and clinician space, or maybe bringing in some patients here and there to kind of pepper in that patient voice as well. And come to consensus, because basically it operates similar to a Delphi process, just a little bit faster and more efficiently. And to try and identify what those clinical and objective measures are of craniocervical instability. So that is on the docket. We just have not done that part yet because we were actually waiting for the clinicians to write the questions that they would like to specifically address for that process. So I think they're working on it.
Hi, Caroline. Yes. So we have, we don't have a direct case study of using CDI for pre-screening for clinical trial recruitment, but we do have kind of one step away for other recruitment mechanisms, or even determining the language or the constructs that should be used to communicate those recruitment channels. So this again goes to kind of the conversation around, you know, come to us and let's have a conversation about what exactly you're trying to build. Because one of the earliest use cases for the beginning portions of the CDI methodology was all around information architecture and communication to make sure that you are supporting the primary tasks that drive people to have certain behavioral outcomes. So a great example of this, you know, is if we understand that people are seeking better sleep, then giving a recruitment message out about how there's a clinical trial about X that had nothing to do with sleep would not be very effective. But if we can connect whatever that clinical trial is and its outcomes to some sort of sleep mechanism, or finding how that information architecture exists under the surface and the interconnections between the pieces, then it is much easier to communicate for that clinical trial recruitment. And then on the other side of actually generating the kind of the secondary endpoints that could be used in clinical trials is also a rather large use case that we built it for. We have soon coming out some case studies that went around that. They are just not published yet on how we used kind of the same sorts of mechanisms that Caitlin described for the PFDD system for finding other treatment and symptom channels that could be used as secondary endpoints for those trials.
I'll say with my PXE hat, so I think most of you know that I am the CEO of Genetic Alliance, but I got here from 28 years ago, my kids being diagnosed with PXE. Ian is one of my kids. He's obviously not a kid anymore and clearly in charge of a whole lot more things than I am in some ways. What we do and have done with PXE is to use the CDI community driven innovation tool a whole host of ways. So effectively to say, we've been listening to this community for 28 years and been deeply embedded in it because we have a familial connection to it, obviously. While we have listened to the 5,000 or so people that we've gotten on our registry and our roles, we haven't systematically looked at how or what the people need. And I think we all know this as leaders, that we're often running with in a certain direction. For example, we have 2 phase 2 clinical trials, and yay, that's fabulous. But meanwhile, I've just, in fact, my phone lit up here with a text saying I'm at the doctor's and want to know, can I take steroids for PXE? Well, there's a lot there. And as Caitlin said, some things are obvious and some things are not, and how they're interconnected. I mean, the body is a beautiful thing, and these phenotypes all affect each other. For me to answer that question, not just off the cuff, requires a whole lot of research. And the one phenomenal thing here is that we're able to collect, in our case, similar to what Caitlin did and several other groups have done, Sarah's done this at KCNT1, is to collect what are the signs and symptoms, and then what are the effective treatments that people are using. And what happens when we do that is we get chronic fatigue out of Chiari, and we get drooling out of KCNT1, which is an epilepsy condition, and with PXE got a whole lot of other things as well. And then when we turn to the treatment parts, we get treatments we never heard of that people are using, and in some cases using effectively. And again, I'm going to take a little tooting KCNT1's horn, Sarah, and I, you can jump in if your gardener is, if the noise of the environment's done. But they discovered, for example, that still blowing. They discovered that this drooling problem in kids was being actually treated in some children with Botox injections to the salivary gland. That's not what Biogen, the company that was funding them and us to do this work, was looking for, obviously. And they don't have to worry about that. Biogen doesn't have to worry, but the community can implement something like that then allows kids to sit up, to crawl, and so forth, things that they weren't able to do when this was a severe issue for them. And so just those kinds of discoveries on the basic level have led to really big shifts and changes in my case for how I serve the people, because I start to understand how do I, for one thing, I have the same saying in PXE, if I've seen one PXE person, I've seen one PXE person, but how do I serve the collective and serve those subsets of individuals? And then I'll say we've taken it even further, because we are in phase 2 clinical trials. And now we can take the people who said these symptoms or these symptoms and use the rest of the features of Luna, which the next webinar will go into in another month. So we can put the EHRs from 700,000 portals in the United States and uploads from other countries together with what people reported and start to look at, well, clinician consensus is a great thing, but what's really happening? Because clinicians are pretty biased as well. They believe that a certain thing's working. I just got off a really early morning call with all the European PXE clinicians who have a certain idea about something that I know our data shows is wrong. And we're able to then go into the EHR, to the PRO, because the library at Luna contains hundreds of instruments, and put those together with the community-driven innovation tool to really understand the wraparound of this community, what it is experiencing, what it needs, and so forth. And to the points around clinicians to also understand what is it they're doing, what makes a difference actually in people's lives, what else do people need, such that I'm not just running down one path because that's all I see. And some of what Ian will often say in these kinds of situations too is that some of the kind of lesser concerns of the community start to drive what leadership like I do. And while those are not unimportant, they should not be driving what I'm doing. They just happen to be more noisy. Maybe it's somebody, an individual who's just more articulate and coming forward more, but the other people are suffering more from other things. And so being able to parse actually what is happening here and what priority should I give to it has been really phenomenal.
I would also just add, as far as the potential for data mining, like just thank you, Sharon, for what you and everyone at Luna has set up, because it's really, really strong. As far as like really proving or disproving what is or is not true. I don't think there's anything that exists that is ethical that you can actually get that kind of data from. So I will forever toot the horn of that. It's really, really good.
It's only taken at least my 28 years of being involved in this and trying to build solutions for us to get to this point. And, you know, in kindness to the efforts we've made, the technology has only just caught up to that. We really wanted things that technology couldn't do, and now we have it. Any other questions for Ian or Caitlin? Okay. Well, thank you very much, Ian.
Yep. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank
Absolutely.
you.
And as we said earlier, yes, Sarah, we are too. As we said earlier, feel free to reach out, Ian at lunadna.com, or to anyone of us here at Luna. We're all happy to help. And Caitlin, of course, is happy to talk to anyone about all of this. We're kind of, she has offered to be the advocacy liaison to whoever needs to chat about CDI. So yeah, thank you very much for coming. And thank you, Caitlin, as well, for joining us and sharing everything you did.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining too. I personally cannot wait till this gets published so I can start waving it around like a crazy person.
And Caitlin, I want to thank you because we know as leaders often what we get is overwhelmed with lots of stuff from other groups that really isn't our business. And you've been extremely generous with your time, and that really helps a lot when others are trying to go through the same thing.
For sure.
All right, we have a new webinar coming up March 1st, which is only a couple weeks away, registries and studies. And you can see in the chat the Zoom link for registering for that one as well. And we look forward to seeing you again. And again, as Ian said, just feel free to reach out, obviously, to me, Sharon at geneticalliance.org, or Ian at lunadna.com. And Caitlin also put her email in there, ksposito@bobbyjonescsf.org. All right, everyone. Thank you and have a good afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world.
Bye. Thank you.